most of the manufacturing companies happen to have a higher value of payment to the managerial staff than to direct labor. This may be because the new manufacturing practices itself require less labor content, but still the managerial salaries are making a substantial part of any manufacturing organization. The way we handle a vast and complex organization is well known. We'll make departments and we'll make hierarchies. And what does this hierarchy do? It looks at only one part, which is the communication part. The production part is done way down the line. So what the automobile did was to reduce the communication part, the transportation part, and a lot with coordination part, which is the communication part any which way. They started structuring. That means if a nut was required to be assembled in sub-assembly, the sub-assembly was earlier done in the main factory. It was given along with the manufacturing resources to somebody outside the factory who would then do sub-assembly, and the supplier which was supplying to the assembly plant would not start supplying to the sub-assembly manufacturer. So now what happened? Instead of the products flowing left, right, up and down, that means the nut went to the factory, then the sub-assembly manufacturer bought only part of it and then supplied the sub-assembly part to the final assembly. The travel part or the transportation part was causing huge amount of problem. And this problem or chaos led to more money being spent on coordination part. Not only that, the storage had become a problem. Most of these companies had very sophisticated inventory management softwares which were run by so many executives. And very often the review would happen, what is the stock, which is going to be stock out and things like that. Even our companies like Maruti Udyog until 17, 18 years ago were doing the same thing. But now all those storages have become their production places. The space which was used for storage is now being used for production. So it is the storage also which was getting expensive. The same boundaries, the same factory is now producing double the number of cars. To produce the double number of cars, they needed space. Where did they get space from? They reduced the storage part. But not only this, they're manufacturing more with much less number of people. How did that happen? Because they then structured the movement of items in such a way that the transportation went down, it also reduced the monitoring part of it. Let me explain very nicely. There is a small manufacturer who makes particular nuts and bolts. Amongst all the activities, design part is something which is being held by the assembler who sits at the top of the supply chain. This assembler actually has the majority control in design. However, there are some more designers who have control on certain patents, or they have the technology for it. One such manufacturer is Bosch. They have such a strong control on diesel fuel injectors that most of the people who design their engines have to depend on Bosch to supply this. So though this particular component is a small part of the overall car, he still is being given a higher status. So beginning from top, the assembler handles the design, but this design also decides what kind of a bolt will be manufactured by the lowest level or the lowest tier supplier. But it can also happen that this low tier supplier is not a high volume producer any which way. He produces very small quantity. For that small quantity, he may not have the ability to negotiate with a very big manufacturer, steel manufacturer, good rates. So the assembler negotiates with the steel manufacturer the rates, and the quantity is then picked up at that specified rate by this low level manufacturer. The bolts. The bolts then get used by, let us say, sheet metal manufacturer who manufactures 3-4 parts. Then it goes to a sub-assembler who gets more bolts and the parts and assembles them. He then takes it to another high-level sub-assembly manufacturer who manufactures a sub-assembly to a level that can be taken straight to the assembly line and mounted on the car. The amount of attention to be paid to every item coming into the factory was very high. So this particular person manufactures the bolts. The bolts then get used by sheet metal manufacturer who manufactures 3-4 parts. Then it goes to a sub-assembler who gets more bolts and the parts and assembles them. He then takes it to another high-level sub-assembly manufacturer who manufactures a sub-assembly to a level that can be taken straight to the assembly line and mounted on the car. Whole supply chain got tiered. Tiered primarily from the point of use of the finished products of one stage. So as we kept adding, the final value of the product which went and was put inside the assembly line or on the assembly line, okay, was much higher, and so, and obviously less in number, didn't require too much of labor force at that level. So they managed the labor force, they managed the effort required, they managed transportation, sorting and storage at the place where it was required. All this actually took away a lot of money from the supply chain running cost, and hence these things became efficient. This was an example used and other supply chains started following it. As I said, the ninth activity of designing is actually where the whole supply chain is integrated. The concepts, design, everything is developed by the assembler. They control every aspect. They are the ones which give you the specifications against which to manufacture. They are the ones who are in touch with the demand. So very less of that activity gets done as we keep moving down. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, on the top is the assembler, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 and Tier 4. Sometimes majority of the design is done by the assembler, sometimes Tier 1 also does designing. Sometimes there is only one person who has only the design capability, does no manufacturing. That person sits in between the assembler and the Tier 1. But tier 1 is one person who lands up doing a lot of the activities of the supply chain. And as we keep going down, the number of activities being done by the manufacturing people keeps going down. So tier 2 will be doing lesser number of the listed activities than tier 1. And this is how one also finds its space in the supply chain. If you do more of the activities, you add more value to the supply chain and you are a valuable contributor. The lesser you do, the less important you may be in terms of money and technology. So if you make a small component, naturally the money involved is less. But if you make a sub-assembly, that means you are taking the responsibility of communication, coordinating, storing many parts and then making a sub-assembly and then transporting to the next level. You are doing a lot of these activities yourself. And hence, you are adding more value. So most of the tiering gets sorted out by the number of activities you do and in quantity, not in numbers. By the value, I mean to say. You can tick off all, but if there's small amount of transportation, if there's small amount of production, a small part, okay, you are doing the thing. That is called qualitative. What is the level, what is the contribution of that activity in the whole process that makes you more valuable? That means the more value of each activity you put, the higher in the tiering system you are. So automobile system got tiered just because of understanding how these 9 activities were done by every level. Design being one of the key drivers, the higher you were, more of design went inside. The lower you were, the lesser you did. The higher you went, more of assembly, that means production, sorting, storing, transporting, communication you did. The lesser you were, you did less of it because it just dealt in very few components. If you made one, you didn't have to coordinate with 20 suppliers which were used to make a sub-assembly. So the supply chain exhibits some form of semblance or structure based on these set of activities, but all the supply chains do the same activities. Electronics also the same thing happens. In automobile line also one important part was financing part. That is nothing but the credit terms we give. In electronics part, since very few people take full responsibility of the design and execution of the product, the small component manufacturers are still technically not treated as suppliers, they are treated as vendors. That means very heavy negotiations take place, trust levels are low, they are given a schedule, they are just not shown enough of data, or they are not actually brought inside the company to help reduce some of the pain of the manufacturers. Electronics industry is also structured in a similar way. Most of the supply chains we talked about, electronics to auto to a supermarket chain, they are all based on the list of 9 activities we just talked about. And it is your ability to perform these activities with a better technology or with a better ability decide how competitive you are in the supply chain. And the more number of activities you do, the chances are you will make more money.